Hey everybody, I just wanted to take a couple minutes and walk through Zoom. Some of you have never used it before, some of you have never had the opportunity to host your own virtual meetings. I'm sure most of you have been in a virtual meeting or two, but setting up Zoom for the first time can be a little daunting, so I'll walk you through essentially the settings. So the first thing that you're going to want to do is you're going to want to have uh, Zoom's homepage brought up. So if in the US it's zoom.us, you can type in zoom.com, and based on your IP address, it'll automatically take you to zoom.us. But the next thing you're going to want to do is go here to sign in. So you should have gotten your username or your email address and password from your IT or from whoever set up your account. So you'll need to make sure that you've got that and you're logging into the appropriate account, because different accounts have different capabilities, and if you're using the Zoom Professional, you have a lot more flexibility with what you can and cannot do with Zoom. So you're going to sign in, and when you sign in, the first thing that's going to pop up is there any of your meetings that are upcoming. We're going to go over to settings. That's where we're really wanting to start off right now. So when you're looking at your settings, there's several different ways you can set things up depending on your set of circumstances, how you like to train, all those different things. But there are some default settings that will happen for you no matter what every time you use the Zoom platform. So at this point, we're not even in the app yet. We're just looking at the actual settings in Zoom, which when you log into your Zoom desktop app, will actually start these things for you. So as you're going through, you'll start off very simply with what you want to do for video, for specifically for you and for your participants. So on the host video, this basically means what happens for you the first time you launch your meeting, whether it be a scheduled meeting or whether it be an on-demand meeting that you just you throw up real quick ad hoc. But the host video is essentially, what do you want for you? So when you log in and you start the meeting, is your video going to be on or is your video going to be off? I keep mine off because I normally start my meetings 5 to 10 minutes ahead of the meeting actual meeting time, and people don't need to see the empty space behind me or the crazy things that I might do when no one's looking. And then participant video, the next thing that the next setting there, this is what happens when your participants join the meeting. Do you want their video on or off? I, as a recommendation, would tell you to leave this off. Most people don't know that their video is automatically going to pop up when they're logging on, and they're not necessarily ready for it. It's a hard lesson learned that when people log into meetings, they're not necessarily always dressed the most appropriately or doing things that you would want other people to see you do in public. So to save them and yourself some embarrassment, I always recommend starting the meeting with the participants' video off. Okay, and you can also change that during the meeting if you need to. For audio types, you want to make sure you allow both telephone and computer audio if you're doing something that you're allowing people to remote dial into. So if they don't need to see your screen or use the Zoom app, and you're going to allow them to use the Zoom phone numbers with your meeting code, then you would want to have telephone and computer audio enabled so that anyone who joins the meeting can actually participate and engage in the meeting. They might not be able to see the screen if they're on a telephone, but they'll be able to at least talk. The next one down is joining before the host. If you don't want people kind of collaborating or confusing each other or discussing things prior to the start of the meeting, you can turn this off, which is, you see, I currently have it turned off. And what they'll get instead when they go to join the meeting, say they join 5 to 10 minutes early, what they'll see is a little gray text box on their screen that says it's waiting for you, the host, to actually start the meeting. For your personal meeting IDs, there's different settings based upon the types of meetings that you're going to run. So if you're going to run scheduled meetings where you're going to put them on a calendar, maybe you send them out via email, or you're going to schedule them on your calendar and send the invitations manually, what you're going to want to do is set the different things for those. So I always use my personal meeting ID. I find it's easier that when people know my meeting ID one time, if I'm running, like a 5-day class or something along those lines, and I don't mind who pops in and who pops out, then I would always use my personal meeting ID and not require a password. If I'm running an instant meeting, or it's not a scheduled meeting and maybe we're talking about business stuff or we're having a conference with things that we don't want people to see, then you would not want to use your personal meeting ID when starting an instant meeting. You can also change this on the actual interface itself. It'll ask you if you want to start a meeting with your meeting ID, or if you don't. I always try and use my personal meeting ID when I run any kind of meeting. I can set it up to require a password or have some sort of authentication for people to be able to come in. So if I do want to allow my meeting ID to stay the same at all times, but I want to make sure that I only let the people in that I want, I would want to set up authentication techniques along the way, like passwords or my personal meeting ID or something along those lines. If I want to do that manually, let's say I'm scheduling most of my meetings, I'm sending them out to my students through email, just to let them know when I will be live. Maybe I'm holding specific office hours for a Q&A, or maybe I don't mind them, dropping in on other classes to relearn a lesson, something along those lines. I can send it out to them, and if I am requiring passwords, I can actually embed that in the email link. So as soon as they click it, it kind of comes over and it automatically authenticates them on the way into the session, which is very handy. Same thing when users join by phone. You can require a meeting password that ensures that they are able to get in, but that not just anyone can come in. Another really handy feature, one I recommend everyone turns on, is something called mute participants upon entry. Much like the camera, people don't necessarily know that their microphone is on as soon as the meeting starts, and as a result of that, say some pretty candid things that are probably best left to private. So again, hard lesson learned. One of the things that I have done is set mine up to mute everyone on their way in. That way, when they're ready to talk, they can take themselves off mute and say whatever they need to say. For you, if you're sending out notifications via email and you're scheduling meetings and Zoom knows you're scheduling meetings, you're using the Zoom meeting app either with Google or with Outlook or any other meeting or email application, you can actually set up so that you get desktop reminders on your desktop, I'm guessing, but it'll come up and it'll make a sound. It's a very strange sound. You'll immediately know you need to look at your computer, and you'll see, okay, my meeting is starting in 5 minutes, and you can actually click a button right there on that notification that says to start the meeting. Some additional basic functions or features that you're going to want to decide on what you want to do is your chat functionality. You're going to want to decide whether you do or do not want to allow chat in your meetings. I enable it in all of mine by default because I allow the students to discuss things back and forth, engage with me privately without actually having to come off mute and talk to me. They can just post any questions they might have in the chat, and I monitor the chat feed and I answer the questions as they pop up or when the time is most appropriate. You can allow private chatting where the participants can chat back and forth to each other privately, or they can chat to you privately. Some student bodies, this is not a good idea to allow private chat back and forth, so of course you just come over here and you click this button and you turn it back off. But one of the things you can do is you can auto save chats. So any chats that have happened in the meeting, you don't have to manually save them yourself. You click this button right here, it turns it on, and any chat that has happened throughout the entire meeting between people, between you and another student, all the public chats, it all gets saved to a file, and you can actually review it later if you want to. So handy things for participants and the instructor is playing sounds when people come in or leave the meeting. I turn this on, but I set it up for only me to hear it because I'm used to the sound. Students not necessarily are going to fall into that category, so they hear that and they get distracted, and we don't necessarily want them to do that. So I turn that chime on so that I know someone new has come in or has left the meeting. When you're talking about telephone participants, you can allow them by clicking this checkbox right here to record their voice, and it'll announce them on the way into the meeting. This is an okay feature. Most meeting softwares have this turned on by default. Zoom allows you to turn it on or off because of some of the ridiculous things people say on their way into meetings. And if they're joining late, or if you already have a large group in there, you don't want a distraction from some crazy thing that's said when they recorded. For the file transfer, if you're going to allow you're going to allow people to share PDFs back and forth or pictures or things like that, you can turn on the file transfer button and they can drop those files into the chat window. So maybe you give a student a worksheet and it's a PDF and they save it and they can drop it in there and you can actually check it, or you can use any type of file really to have them send it to you and then you can grade it rather than throwing those things back and forth via email. You can limit it to specific file types. Maybe you're afraid of certain things coming in, so maybe you want to exclude things like zip files or .exe files to kind of for safety and security, but maybe you want to use doc or docx files or G Drive files, Google Sheets, things like that. Maybe you put those extensions in there. If you're okay with them sending anything at all, you can unclick that, and then whatever they want to drop into the chat window, they're allowed to send back and forth. Again, remember that if you turn on the private chat, they can be sending anything back and forth to each other without you being able to vet it until, of course, after the meeting, in which case you'll get that download of all the chats that happen. You can allow, you can turn this on or off. I leave it on just to allow Zoom to capture information from students who feel like giving it back to Zoom. And then you can do a feedback survey at the end for them to give a thumbs up or a thumbs down. You can kind of capture what people thought of the meeting. If they give a thumbs down, it allows them to come back in and discuss what they gave it a thumbs down for. Co-host feature is a really is a cool feature if you're going to be teaching or training with someone else. You can set up someone as a co-host, and they would, once you've given them co-host authorization, they have the ability to start the meeting, change your slide deck, annotate things with the whiteboard, but basically the co-host can act as you, the facilitator for the meeting, and do everything that you can. Obviously, you want to give this to someone who is a responsible individual, not just absolutely anyone. And you do have to announce who the co-host is when you're scheduling the meeting, so that they can have those different controls. Polling is one of the things you can turn on. It allows you to send surveys and questionnaires and things like that to the student body while they're working, and you can say, what's one thing you wish you had done differently today, and you give them a set of choices, or you can allow them to free text and they can answer those poll questions. You can put the meeting on hold and also boot out different IDs that are maybe being disruptive or shouldn't be in the room. And then down here a little lower, I'll go ahead and just go down there now. Right here where it says allow removed participants to rejoin, I always turn that off. If I bounce them out of the meeting, there's probably a reason that I bounced them out of the meeting, and I don't want them to come back in there. Now, if you want to bounce somebody out and allow them to come back in after a cool-off period or something like that, maybe you need to turn that back on, but I always leave that off. Okay, so the meeting toolbar, there's a meeting control toolbar, and once we start running the app and I screen capture that, you'll actually get to see the meeting toolbar. I always hide mine because it gets in the way of my slide decks when I'm trying to kick amazing knowledge to whoever is foolish enough to come and listen to it, like you all. And what I do is I hide mine so that it's not in my way. But you can set it up to always be on. If you're not familiar with the software, you can turn that off later in the actual app, and you can leave it on while you're learning your way around the system, and then turn it off once you're a lot more comfortable. You can set this up to show Zoom windows during a screen share. So this is a dangerous thing. I'm going to go ahead and let you know. What we're going to do later as we record these, I'm going to allow my Zoom windows to be shown. But when it says show Zoom windows during a screen share, this shows literally everything that you're doing. So if a chat window has popped up and you're private messaging back and forth with somebody, they can see it. By they, I mean literally anybody that's on that shared screen. Now, if you're using two screens and you keep your chat on a separate screen, obviously that's not a problem. But anything that is a Zoom window, you'll be sharing with everyone who you are screen sharing to. So by default, I always turn that off just because I don't necessarily want people to see the things that are going on behind the scenes. I just want them to focus on the material that I'm trying to instruct them with. For screen sharing, you always want to make sure that's on because you want to be able to share the screen during your lessons. So if you're using PowerPoint slide decks, or maybe like what I'm doing right now, where I'm showing the the internet browser, I want my students to be able to have a realistic thing to look at, so a tangible thing to see. So as I go through, they can also see it as well. So you're going to want to turn that on so that at a minimum you can share. I have it set up so that if I'm having a private session and I want to throw it over to somebody else while they're talking, it allows them to be able to do that. And then I always recommend, if you are turning screen sharing on, that you are the only person that can start a new share when someone else is sharing. So if someone's sharing, maybe you let your students share their screen so you can see the work that they're doing on their screen, and somebody else goes in and starts screen sharing in over top of them. So I don't let other participants share while anyone else is sharing. They would have to stop sharing, and then the next student would share, or I can start sharing mine. I can basically steal the power away. So if they draw something inappropriate on their thing, or if they're done, or maybe they pass out because they're nervous about being on video camera, you can take the control of that meeting back over. You can disable it for specific people, and you can only allow them to show specific things instead of the full desktop. So if you only want to share a specific window, or them to share a specific window or a certain type of information, you can disable it so they can't share their entire screen, just one specific piece of their screen, so whatever application is running. So this is handy if you don't want to know what their desktop background looks like or something like that. Annotation is turned on by default, but is one of those things that allows you to essentially draw on the screen while you're talking. So if you have a light pen, or if you have a touch screen, you can draw with your finger, and if you don't have a touch screen, obviously you have to use the mouse to be able to do that. But you can draw on the screen while you're presenting the material. So if you want to highlight something, or if you want to do maybe you've got a slide up that talks about some sort of word problem or calculation issue, you can actually do the math on the screen that they're looking at, so they can see everything going on. A whiteboard is it's the same thing, but it's slightly different. So a whiteboard essentially is a completely blank screen that you can share, and maybe you're going to do a math lesson from start to finish. So instead of having to have a whiteboard behind you where people are watching you on camera, instead you can do all that work on your desktop, and you can share that independently. It uses the same exact functionality as the annotation does. It just it stops the screen share from the slideshow and puts it straight to a completely blank whiteboard. And then allowing remote control. This is something that most people will turn off by default. I recommend turning it off by default because this allows other people, you have to give permission of course, but this allows other people to control what's actually happening on your computer. So they can move the content forward or backward or whatever. So I turn it off by default just because I don't want anybody messing with it. Nonverbal feedback allows people to use kind of icons to discuss happiness or sadness, or thumbs up, thumbs down during the lesson. Rather than talking or chatting into the thing, they can just put a thumbs up and you say, okay, Ian, I understand, you got it. And then again, we already talked about the allowing removed participants to rejoin feature. So that's it for most of the basic functions. There's a ton of stuff to cover. You're going to probably work with your administration or with some other instructors to determine what's the best settings for you. But I recommend that you go in here and you at a minimum look and see what's turned on your account, so that you can decide what maybe you want to also turn on or what you want to turn off based upon your unique scenario. I'll be back soon with another video, and we'll talk about advanced settings, which has some really cool and really fun features. Okay, so I'll see everybody in just a little while.